Hello, thank you for joining us in the salon. I'm Adam Smith. I'm the Program Director for Dementia Researcher, and I'm delighted to be hosting today's salon meeting, which is going to be all about study recruitment. As you probably know, these salon sessions are a new type of gathering where we explore research and career topics to get some new perspectives and hopefully educate and entertain and share some new ideas and give you a chance to contribute as well and share some of your own. We start with a 30-minute live stream, which includes some thought-provoking and informative talks from two great speakers. Although, as you can see, we've got a third speaker today. We've got a bonus speaker. So we have these two 10-minute talks. We have a little bit of chat in between. We're going to get some new ideas. And just to let you know, the speakers haven't had lots of preparation. I haven't told them what to say. So who knows what they're going to talk about. They've been given a very open brief to say, talk about study recruitment. But let's, for now, get on with some introductions, shall we? Dr. Sarah Griffiths is here, first of all. Hi, Sarah. Sarah's got a camera off. There we go. Sarah's coming. Sarah's a senior fellow at University College London with a background in speech and language therapy. Sarah has expertise in primary care-based interventions, development and evaluation, and qualitative research methods. And I'm sure people who are regular visitors to Dementia Researcher have read some of Sarah's blogs, and she's been on the podcast before as well. And much of her work involves research participants, and she spends a lot of time considering study recruitment, as so many of us do. We also have Sophia Arminia, who is a registered nutritionist and a fellow of the Higher Education Academy and a postdoc fellow at Bournemouth University. Are you there, Sophia? Sophia's hot and has had the fan on. We thought she was initially on the side of a mountain, but it's not. It's just a fan. Sophia leads multiple studies and is on an interdisciplinary research with expertise and experience in innovative, quantitative and qualitative research methods. Hi, Sophia. And finally, we have Charlotte Jones, who is our bonus speaker for today. Charlotte is the research delivery officer, I think, at Join Dementia Research, which is a service that's close to my heart, something I was involved with many years ago, which is a national service to support study recruitment in the UK. But I'm not going to tell you more about that. I'm going to let Charlotte do that a little bit later. Where am I? Recruiting, let's set the scene a little bit. Recruiting participants for dementia research studies is a critical step in advancing our understanding and treatment of the condition. Effective recruitment strategies are essential to ensure a diverse representation of and sample of participants, and this often involves collaboration with healthcare providers, using registries and outreach to communities and various media these days. But where do you start? What if your study recruitment fails? How do PhD students find people for their studies? That's a hot topic as well, particularly if you're working in an academic institution and not in healthcare. But that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's get into it and hear from our speakers. That's enough from me. I think Sarah is going to go first. So we're going to turn our cameras and mics off. And Sarah's, ooh, that's a great view. We've got infinite Sarahs. There we go.
What have I done wrong?
While Sarah's looking at that, I've got some stats. Do you want to? We'll try that one more time. Let me give you a stat. Studies show that approximately 50% of clinical trials fail to recruit the required number of participants or take longer to deliver, which is one of the reasons why Join Dementia Research came about in the first place, was because the downside of studies failing to find enough participants is that they either don't get the sample size you need to get the results you need, or they take twice as long to deliver as you'd expect. And so we don't get the benefit of those results as quickly as we would hope for. So another reason why it's important to have really great, effective recruitment strategies. Should we try again, Sarah?
Yeah.
We'll get there.
I'm sending you the presentation as well, just in case.
Okay. I'll fire my email open so I can have that as a backup if need to.
I'm sorry. I don't know why, but when I go to window, it's showing me this multiple screens thing rather than just my PowerPoint. So
That's okay. I will keep hitting send and receive on my emails and get that ready as well. What else? I'll give you another stat while we're rating. Research suggests that only 4% of participants in clinical trials actually come from ethnic minority groups, despite these groups often being disproportionately affected by some of the conditions that we're obviously talking about, which I think is something that Sophia's going to talk to as well. I'm going to use up all my stats right at the start. I've got one more stat
it's not playing ball. So I don't know if you want to share from your version.
I've got it here. Okay, so just give me 2 seconds with this. So you'll just have to tell me when you'd like the slides progressing, Sarah.
No problem. I shall enjoy that. So I've got my salon t-shirt on. I've raised my chair a bit so you can see that I've got it on. Okay, is everything all right? Can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Brilliant. So I thought I would just bring a few bits of learning and practical tips from projects I've been involved with. Some of it might overlap with what Sophia's going to talk about later, but I'm not going to focus so much on underserved groups within dementia, so hopefully it won't overlap too much. Next slide, please. So people with dementia are an underserved group in research in themselves, often being excluded from research about their needs. So fewer than 2 in 5 people diagnosed in England and Wales have a documented discussion about taking part in research. And latest figures showed that 2% of people with dementia are registered with Join Dementia Research, but I expect Charlotte can tell us more about that because I think there's been some recent initiatives which have helped to improve that figure. Next slide, please. So what are the barriers that we need to overcome with recruitment? So firstly, perceptions. Researchers, people with dementia themselves, and carers might all make assumptions about capacity and ability to take part in research. Many people rule themselves out or are ruled out by others, when careful adaptation could help overcome barriers to do with cognitive and communication difficulties. Another factor is cynicism. So people with dementia and carers often feel abandoned after diagnosis, so they feel, what's the point in getting involved? Nothing's going to improve. And we need to really understand this and try and build in strategies to overcome it. There can also be some misunderstandings about who can take part. When people with dementia are included in research, it often tends to be people more in the early stages. But when researchers want to include people in more advanced stages or people who don't speak English, perhaps, often carers assume that their relative or friend wouldn't be eligible, irrespective of what the research information might say. And where the person with dementia's participation really relies on a carer to take part to support them, a common reason for opting out is carer strain. Carers are just too busy doing all the dementia care. And then a common opt-out reason is the person with dementia gets anxious talking with new people or is not accepting of the dementia diagnosis, which would make it too distressing to take part. So a prominent overarching barrier, which I'm sure that Sophia will cover as well, is a lack of trust due to historical discrimination, racism, lack of support, and anxieties about what will actually happen to people in the research. Next slide, please. So what can we do to overcome the barriers? So where possible, developing the recruitment strategy with a diverse group of public contributors can be really invaluable. They can help you identify sources of recruitment, such as organizations and community groups, and also help you create realistic recruitment targets. As well as your public contributors, it's good to scope out your co-applicants and your steering group for their contacts, so you can create a comprehensive list of potential recruitment supporters. You can use accessible posters to advertise the project. And also, I found that telling potential recruitment supporters about any co-development you've already done can really inspire them to help you with recruitment. It really gets them confident and on board. Clinical research networks often help with who and where to target recruitment. They hold EDI information for areas and where the hotspots are for recruiting sites, like those with high levels of social deprivation and high proportions of people with dementia on GP practice lists. Can you do a click for me, Adam, to show the diagram? Thank you. So a proactive approach to recruitment can be effective, bearing in mind that people with dementia won't necessarily read or understand a letter and it might get lost. In 2 projects that I've been involved in, DPACT and PRIDEM, we used a proactive recruitment approach shown here with an initial mail out followed by a series of follow-up calls to people who didn't respond at each stage. So often people are wary of picking up the phone. So you also need a strategy of when and how often to phone and what message to leave. And that's something that the public contributors can help you to develop. So interestingly, 46% of PRIDEM participants with dementia were recruited via a follow-up phone call, where we could explain more about the study, who was eligible, and reassure people about how they would be supported throughout the research process. Next slide, please. So in terms of recruitment resources, it's important to work with public contributors to ensure accessibility. Creating video or audio versions of participant information sheets, using images to support comprehension, reducing text as much as possible, and including photos of the friendly researchers that people will meet. These are all strategies to improve accessibility. And whilst the main PIS should be easy read, you can also create a short version which can be which you can sort of use to go through with people. It can also be helpful to use exactly the same formats that you've used for people with dementia with carers, so that what they receive looks exactly the same and it doesn't seem like you're singling people out for special support. And regarding consent, there needs to be built into the research some time to start developing a relationship with a potential participant before obtaining consent. Determining capacity is then supported by informal conversations in which you can start observing kind of people's understanding and level of willingness and interest in taking part. Making sure that the informed consent process is as informal and conversational as possible means that the person won't feel put on the spot and tested, and thereby won't be put off joining the research. And having a flexible option for recording consent is also helpful. So this could be using audio video consent or just use of field notes to explain exactly what happened. This 2022 paper reflects on some useful conversation strategies around capacity and consent. So for example, when introducing the idea that a consultee might be involved or might be needed, it's helpful to present this really positively as a way of making it easier for the person with dementia to take part, and also reassuring them that involving someone else to give an opinion about their participation won't change the way in which they can be involved in the study. Next slide, please. So on this slide, there's just a couple of additional practical points. Make it clear if interpreters are costed in, and there's a tool developed by NIHR for doing that costing. And the barriers that I mentioned for carers could be overcome by including the costs of replacement care and also collaborating with care charities in the design phase of the project. Next slide. And here's a nice couple of resources to help with developing accessible materials for the research. One about how to write and produce better information for people with dementia by Innovations in Dementia, and bringing people with dementia into the heart of research written by dementia inquirers. Next slide, please. So a few additional ideas for supporting retention, because that's also part of the equation. So reducing retention by reducing the burden, reducing anxiety, and just making taking part a bit more enjoyable for people. Offering different ways to participate in research activities can be helpful, like a choice of in-person or remote visits, or a choice of researcher-delivered or online questionnaires where that's appropriate. And in studies with follow-up visits, where possible, the same researcher visiting each time helps build up trust and relationships, as does routinely phoning to remind people when you'll visit. And this has the added benefit of supporting recall as well. And we've used written cue cards like the one shown here on the right to support participants in responding to multiple choice items on questionnaires. This can be used both as a visual prompt to aid comprehension and recall, and also to help people stay on track. And for video calls, cards can be sent to people in the post beforehand. So we found that both people with dementia and carers have found this sort of really simple communication strategy really helpful and powerful. And another benefit that we didn't foresee was that where a participant is really worried that a relative could hear their responses from another room, they could indicate their response just by pointing, which they really appreciated. And researchers also benefited from using this strategy, as you can see from this quote. To avoid seeming patronizing, I'll often ask if I can use the cards in order to save my voice, as it saves me from repeating the same options over and over. I'm sure we've all had that experience. So next slide, please. So back to the overarching issue of trust. One of the most rewarding aspects of recruitment is building relationships with participants and having the chance to hear their perspectives. The ideal research project would build in enough funding for researcher capacity to get to know participants, accept their frequent generous offers of tea and cake, and engage in informal conversation. And this really gives potential participants a chance to feel valued, get to know us, and feel safe. Final slide, please. So finally, recruitment means entering into a relationship. Researchers have to be able to manage people's distress and upset as part of that, as our contact is often the only chance a person has to really speak about the dementia. This carer speaks about the benefits of this for her. I can imagine some researchers might hold themselves outside it. I can't get involved. But actually, it's such a sad and difficult thing. So if someone doesn't say to you, it is tough, or, oh yes, I can see that's tricky, whatever it might be. So I do find that helpful, just that acknowledgement. So I'm just going to finish with a thought that there are potential therapeutic benefits of a research visit for people with dementia and carers, and also a need for researchers to be looked after too. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was brilliant. What a great kind of overview of touching on a little bit of everything there. I think I would ask if somebody watching was say a PhD student who's just building their study now. One of the things that I remember from particularly from my time at working at Join Dementia Research was having a chat with a student who'd come back and then to immediately say, "Oh yeah, we're going to recruit 75 people in Bournemouth. We're going to recruit 110 people in London and 50 people in Yorkshire," and then immediately having big wide eyes and going, "Really? Are you sure? That's quite a lot of people." What advice would you have for somebody who's looking at how when they're designing their study, about setting themselves some realistic targets for study recruitment?
I think just to acknowledge that it is really hard to recruit people with dementia and it takes time. So for an example, for the PRIDEM study, we recruited in total 60 people with dementia, and that was across 7 GP practices. And then it took us 5 months with a number of researchers. And a sort of drawn out process as well, involving making friends with the GP practice staff and identifying, relevant contacts and enlisting their support as well. So just to, be realistic, don't be hard on yourself if you find you're not meeting your targets. There are always things that, say, your supervisors can do to help, and you can always kind of change direction and involve more recruitment supporters. But yeah, keep it realistic.
Yeah, and I suppose I mean, have a chat with other people as well about the
Mm.
challenges that they've faced
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
that. Because I, particularly when GP surgeries, it wasn't until we were trying to recruit to a study, and then I just did the maths and went, okay, so there are 100,000 people diagnosed each year, and when you broke that down across some GP surgeries, you were talking potentially about some GP surgeries only having 50, 60 people with a diagnosis in their surgery. And if
Yeah.
you then took out the people that were at the later stages potentially, or would find participation difficult, and then the ones who actually wanted to, you were putting an awful lot of effort into working with one GP surgery to find that they probably only had about 5 or 6 people. And if you were trying to, if it was a survey that needed hundreds of responses, you did as much work with that one GP surgery as you might with a memory clinic that diagnosed hundreds of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a balance to be struck there, isn't there, as well?
Definitely.
So I'm interested. How does your background in speech and language therapy influence your approach to study recruitment, particularly with populations that might have communication challenges? Has that given you an extra edge, do you think?
I don't know really. I don't have anything to compare it with, but I feel like because my special interest is communication, probably take that into every encounter, and try and problem solve around how to um, involve people despite the obvious communication difficulties. So there was one chap that took part in the Pride project that had primary progressive aphasia. And I think I just kind of naturally tried to use more visual resources than I would with any other participant to support his understanding, use of
Yeah.
drawing, writing down keywords. It's just something that I would just pull out of the bag to try and support communication. But I think like a lot of researchers are getting more skilled in that anyway, generally. So yeah, who knows?
I liked your suggestions on the kind of resources you might create to support recruitment. I remember one of the things that I'd hoped that we could do with Join Dementia Research was encourage researchers to make these kind of short films, particularly
Mm,
students, where you kind of make these short 3-minute films saying, "Hey, this is me. This is why I'm doing this research. This is what we hope to get for it. This is the people we're looking for. These are people we aren't looking for. This is what you'll have to do." And I think you make that connection a little bit more than you do from reading it. But the problem is you've still got
yeah,
to then get that film in front of people,
yeah,
which I think
yeah.
is the hard part. And certainly just
Mm,
posting on X isn't gonna tick that box.
no. I think it
Um,
certainly helps reduce that anxiety about speaking to new people. If people with dementia can sort of see and hear from the researchers and see what they're like, get a sense of it, and realize perhaps they're not as sort of scary as they might have thought.
yeah, absolutely. Actually, that's a good point. That's a good place to just take a little pause there and bring Charlotte in, who's been very quietly sitting there. Hi, Charlotte.
Been listening intently and hearing all the shout outs of Join Dementia Research. So
Yeah, you've done quite well so far. So why don't you? So Join Dementia Research has been around a while. I should say anybody who's watching this either live or recorded, it is a UK system. But
yeah.
why don't you tell us a little bit about Join Dementia Research? Sarah trailed you quite nicely in her talk.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that was great. I think there's a few points in terms of reaching people with dementia that obviously we have a lot of healthy volunteers as well, or as we'd call them, healthy volunteers. But I'll try and give an overview of our recent stats as well without boring everyone, because it has, the kind of demographic of people with a diagnosis has improved as well recently. So if I just share my kind of stats infographic here, I'll go. Is that working for everyone? Does that look
It
okay?
is. Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Perfect. Well, thank you again for letting me be here. It is really great to be able to talk about Join Dementia Research. I'm obviously biased, but I think it's a great service. So hopefully if we can get a few more people on board in terms of adding studies and things, it would be great for more people to use it. So some of you might have heard of us already. You might have used the service and spoken to myself or my colleagues. And essentially, as Adam said, we're a UK-wide registry service. So we're funded by the Department for Health and Social Care and delivered in partnership by the NIHR with Alzheimer's Society, Alzheimer's Research UK, and Alzheimer's Scotland, who also help operate our phone lines for people who want to register by phone. So we essentially match registered volunteers with dementia research studies that they might be eligible to take part in. And in doing so, we can help both interested volunteers take part in research, and we can also help study teams to recruit to their research studies. So anyone over the age of 18 can sign up with or without a diagnosis of dementia. And from its setup, we've now registered over 76,000 volunteers, which is brilliant. Over 14,000 of our volunteers have either a diagnosis of dementia or a concern about their memory. And we are also running engagement programs like targeted GP text messaging to encourage more people from this demographic to sign up. And actually, in the past 12 months, 27% of volunteers that have signed up are in this demographic, which is a huge increase from previous years. You can see on the slide that currently about 18% of our overall volunteers are in this criteria. So from a researcher's perspective, using JDR can really speed up and increase recruitment to your study. It's completely free to use, and all you need is ethical approval and an approved data sharing agreement with your institution, unless you work in the NHS, and then you're already covered. So you can submit a new study application by filling in our form on our website and pretty much just let us take it from there. Once we've added your study to JDR, we'll have a quick video chat where you can confirm that the matching criteria is accurate for your study. After opening the study, volunteers who match will receive a notification, usually by email, and then they can express their interest in the study. And as a researcher, you're free to contact any volunteers on this matched list. Overall, we've had about 83,000 enrolments into studies, with over 700 studies across the UK having used the service. These might include clinical trials, online surveys, and lifestyle programs. Actually, one of the studies that we've had recently, I think, has almost reached 4,000 recruited volunteers through JDR. Again, worth mentioning, as Sarah and Adam were saying, this is kind of dependent on the demographic. So obviously it's still harder to recruit people with dementia. Some of our success stories have really been studies that have recruited, say, 5 to 10 people, because they're looking for such a specific demographic of people that even that is great. But I can't stress enough how simple it is to use JDR. So, would really encourage when you can reach those people. And these are all interested people interested in taking part in dementia research. So very handy to use. If you're also wondering how many volunteers your study might match to, but you don't want to submit an application, we also have a feasibility tool on our website where you can filter the database to find the number of volunteers that meet your specific criteria. You do have to complete the JDR researcher training for this, but once you have an account, you can use this for any future studies that you'd like to be assigned to on JDR. Lastly, if you have used JDR, you might have seen that we're running a social media campaign for World Alzheimer's Month. So throughout September, we're asking researchers, our charity partners, research champions, and other users to film a short video sharing experiences of using JDR. And if you would like to be involved, you can find the page on the Dementia Researcher website that's got our details for our communications team for this. And I'll also pop the support inbox email in the chat as well, just in case anyone has got any questions. But that's my kind of brief overview. So hopefully I haven't just bombarded everyone with a lot of info, but thank you.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. And what I'm going to do is that was such a brilliant, succinct little slice there. I'm going to chop that out of this and put it into our website as well, because I think
Perfect.
more people need to know that. Well, because I think Join Dementia Research is brilliant in so much as you really do. I think there's this misunderstanding perhaps that you have to, for a study to go on to the NIHR portfolio, it has to be funded through open competition and meet a different set of criteria from JDR, where Join Dementia Research, all that criteria isn't there. It's simply, you just have to have ethics. And let's face
absolutely,
it,
yeah.
every early career researcher that's running a study that involves people will have ethics. So
yeah,
essentially, every study is eligible. And why wouldn't you want access to thousands of people that might participate in your study? You have to kind of put in the time, because you've got to phone people, you've got to email them, you still got to get in touch with people and potentially. But But what I love as well is they might get in touch with you, because once your study's there, they can tick a box and say, I'd like to do this. And then you know who to ring first.
And obviously with our charity partners as well, they receive queries from volunteers about studies, and we can kind of communicate through them as well. So it's definitely, you know, when it can be alongside your normal recruitment methods as well. And we're always here to answer any questions. So, you know, I'd encourage anyone to use it and sign up for it.
And if you're watching and you're not in the UK, the equivalents of Join Dementia Research do exist elsewhere in the world. In Australia, you have Step Up for Dementia Research, which is run by Yun Hee Yon out of Sydney University. And we were involved in helping kind of get that going as well. So do have a look up Step Up for Dementia Research. In the US, of course, you've got Trial Match. I think some individual countries, certainly the Netherlands and Germany, have individual versions of their own. There isn't anything I know of that's pan-Europe, though. But do have a look, and if you're unsure, drop us a message and we'll direct you to those. So thank you very much, Charlotte. Sophia, you've been very patient. I hope you've had the fan on while you've been sitting there on mute. I'm gonna let you give your talk now, and thank you very much for waiting.
Yeah, well, hi everybody. So I'm going to talk about recruitment, but from the perspective of not just a researcher, but a community member as well, because I'm so very much involved in my community and getting people involved in different kinds of research. So just following up on what Sarah said, I think building trust and strong relationships is the key and the start of recruiting from underserved communities. And from the work that I've done, I do define underserved communities not just in terms of race or ethnicity, but in terms of socioeconomic backgrounds as well. And so the way into the community, I do refer to community a lot rather than carers or people with dementia, because patients with dementia live not just with their family, but within a community. And with regards to dementia, there is a lot of stigmatization, especially in the African community or other marginalized communities in the UK. So the way we communicate, the language that we use is really important, and involving the whole community instead of just isolating individuals is quite important in recruitment. So, for example, if we wanted to get access to people living with dementia, a great way to go around this is through faith-based organizations or people in the community that other people respect a lot. So just by me designing a lovely flyer and then sharing it in the community isn't a great way to recruit. We might get a few responses, but in order to get people to talk to us, to want to get involved in the research, we need to go through respected individuals in the community. We also need to, as I said, use inclusive language. So refer to people as they are. So are they Africans? Are they Ghanaians? Are they British? Who are they? Rather than using a blanket term of we are looking for minority ethnic communities, or we are looking for an individual who is suffering, who is having dementia, who is living with dementia, because then people might not see themselves as that. You know, so it's what language do we use that speaks to people? Also, personalization of the invitation I found has been very useful, because just saying we are looking for this sort of individual people and their carers doesn't really speak to someone. And I've found that in a lot of the work I've done, that maybe going into the church or the fellowship or the mosque to talk to people specifically, making them feel a sense of ownership for the research that you are doing, it's really helpful in engaging people and starting that conversation. And also, it's the first attempt of engaging with somebody shouldn't be, hello, I'm doing this research and I want you to get involved in it. it's really helpful to spend some time to get to know somebody. And I can appreciate that for a PhD student, you know, you are just go. I need to get my results. So your first inclination is, hi, I'm a researcher from this and that university. This is what I'm doing. Very often, my first visit is just talking about, you know, getting to know the person living with dementia and their carer. And like Sarah said, appreciating the difficulty of the situation that they are in, showing some empathy and understanding, and then presenting your goal of being in their space at that time. Other things I've found useful is that going into the community or into people's homes sometimes when you are comfortable or when they are comfortable, because they are in their comfort zone, rather than asking them to come and meet you at the university, which sometimes can be hard because they have to arrange transport, you know, they have to get up, prepare, dress up. So for some people that might be quite daunting, coming in the university. So if you're able to meet them somewhere in the community, even if it's not just their home, but in a community center, you know, somewhere close to their home where they are more comfortable, that really helps. And it's building the trust with the community. So embedding yourself in that community and working together with leaders, community members, you know, other influential people in the community, that's really helped. And more importantly, showing respect for people's culture, because I found that sometimes, well, I'm not, if you are not from a community that you are working with, you might not be aware of some cultural nuances. So taking some time to learn a bit about their culture, what is accepted and what is not. For example, if you are offered a cup of tea, can you just refuse it, or do you have to take that cup of tea? Otherwise, it's offensive if you don't, or is it not offensive if you just refuse the cup of tea? So knowing that, how is that perceived, making people feel welcome in the space is really important. The use of language, you know, in terms of their cultural language, not making assumptions. So for example, just because somebody says they are of African origin doesn't necessarily mean they cannot speak English, or they cannot speak French, or whether they need that help. So not making assumption as to what help they need, but being open and discussing with them, what support would you need for this research, rather than making an assumption of what support they will need. Giving them back the power to make those decisions as to what they would want to be part of the research. Pacing things as well, and that comes back to what Sarah mentioned about our informed consent and our participant information sheet. So making it very simple, but building in time to answer people's questions, and also making things culturally relevant, because for example, some people, it's been hard to recruit into dementia research here in the UK because there might be the perception that, oh, it's a Western disease. It's not something that affects me and my family. So why do I need to contribute to that kind of research? But bringing it back to the humanness of it, it's a condition that affects people from all different backgrounds. And as such, selling the representativeness that we do want people from every group to be involved in this sort of research, so that the policies and the care provided are tailored to everybody's needs, are very inclusive. On building trust, again, I said frequent follow-up with participants, like Sarah mentioned. So not just one flyer, but showing some care and concern outside of your research. And I appreciate that takes a lot of time. It's a lot of emotional investment as well, because you come to care for your participants. They are no longer, you know, just a participant you are recruiting, but they've become a friend. They become someone you know. So that is something that researchers need to be mindful of as well, the emotional investment we begin to have with this, with our participants, and how to be able to get that support to download after your visit so that you are not inundated with all these emotions and feelings that you have during your research visit. Incentives also go a long way to help, because you need to value people's time. So it could be arranging for transport for them, a little voucher here and there, but also recognizing that if you are working with people from a low income background, an incentive may go a long way, but you don't also want it to be sort of a coercion. Because I remember there was one study that I was conducting, and I was giving out a £25 voucher. To me, it wasn't a very big deal, but my participant said to me, you know, if I didn't get this voucher today, I wouldn't have been able to afford groceries for the week. And that really put me in a bit of a shock and a bit of a bind, because then I had to ask myself a question: is she doing this because of the voucher, or, you know, is the voucher compelling her to be part of the research? So it's something to be mindful of when we are offering incentives, that they can be good, but also it shouldn't be coercion. So there's the need to understand that even if the voucher is not there, they would still participate, but the voucher is sort of a thank you for people participating, and not necessarily, you know, a condition to take part. And I think also bringing the research into wider impact, because very often people don't see how their contributions have resulted into any changes in policy. And from my community, for example, they tell me, well, I've done so many surveys, but nothing has changed. So often I say to them, you know, it's not just one survey. We need you to be involved in many things, but also feeding back continuously to the your participants, because people need to see that the research cycle is quite long, you know, from grant funding, getting ethics, recruiting other people, getting to your results, and then writing publications and all sorts. It can take years, and they may not immediately see any benefit. But a key thing we've done is to have continuous participant engagement, where we feed back at every stage of the research. So we've been able to recruit this and that people, and this is the stage we are at. And very often when you're struggling with recruitment, because we have fed back, people actually step up and say, okay, I know this other person, I can tell them about it. I know this other family member, I can tell them about it. So in that sense, they start to feel a sense of ownership, and they actually help you in recruitment as well. I think I'll end here and maybe take more questions from Adam.
I love the idea of tell a friend, that kind of word of mouth recommendation. And I think Charlotte's probably got stats from Join Dementia Research, but I know certainly I remember looking at them to say that people don't just participate in one study. I mean, sure, they might, if this is one study that exclusively require, particularly drug trials. Of course, you can't participate in multiple drug trials at once, but qualitative research studies, quite often, once people have had that experience, they will go on. And I think the average number of people used to be about 3 studies that people on JDR. You'd had some people, however, have participated in like 12, 13, 14 studies. And they'll only do that if they have a good experience in there. So it's really important to kind of, as you say, make that experience, give that feedback, demonstrate how your participation, how people's participation in this study is having an impact, even if that is in sharing the paper that resulted or talking about how what's happened since. I've got one question for you though, Sophia. So, I mean, for anybody who's watching, I know you covered this across your talk, but anybody who's watching who wants to increase the diversity of their study participants, what are the kind of top things you think that people should do to reach? Because I've heard this talked about before. Oh, it's a hard to reach group, and then the argument back is no, you're just not trying hard enough. What are the things you would recommend people do?
So first thing, invest in building genuine relationships, because I think people have come to the realization that they are just being a tick box. We just need that 10% so we can tell the funder that we have been diverse. So build genuine relationships with people from these communities, because people are aware that they are being exploited. I'll use that word in a way, for like from the researcher's point of view. So show genuine interest in working with the community, because they can see through it. If you are just there to collect data and go, they can see through it. So show genuine trust, and in building that relationship with the community, that's the first step. And recognize that a lot of resource in terms of time and manpower goes into building that relationship. So I find myself calling or texting at Christmas, Merry Christmas, how is the family doing? Rather than just when I'm ready to collect my data, contact them, collect my data and buy. So show genuine interest in that relationship, but also build a lot of time and resource, because relationship building of any shape or form does take a lot of time. Spend some time networking within the community, because how else would you know how the community operates if you don't spend time in the community? So sometimes I'm from the African community, so there's a lot of funerals and parties. So I do go to that as well, just to get to know
You're not
people.
suggesting that people suddenly randomly start turning up to strangers' funerals, though, are you?
No, but to the parties, you are always invited, I think. And to church, because sometimes you can recruit where they are, because it's hard to reach, because we sit in our offices and we expect people to come to us. But what if we go to them? What if you go to the mosque? You might not be a Muslim, but they might have a coffee chat after prayers. Or church, we do have coffee meetings after prayers. So that's a good place to find people as well, rather than just sharing our flyer or expecting them to come to us all of the time.
And that, I mean, when you say that, it makes complete sense, doesn't it? I mean, you wouldn't suddenly just turn up for a job interview without having done any prep. And I think if in advance you know that you would like participants in your study from a particular community, don't wait until the point that you're trying to recruit to actually start to become involved in that community. You should start to think about that months in advance, if you can, and start to explore ways to become a part of the community that you want to recruit from. When you say it like that, that makes complete sense. And of course, you could bring that back to co-production. This is on the top of my mind because we literally just recorded a podcast yesterday on co-production that'll be out in a couple of weeks' time. In fact, I'm going to release that early into the community. So if you're a community member, you'll get early access to our co-production podcast that we did. And in that podcast, they talked about that co-production doesn't start at it's not the same as patient and public involvement. It doesn't start at a certain point. It starts at the very, as soon as the research idea is born. And I think that's when study recruitment should also be a factor, and making sure that your study samples are representative. I completely agree. Do you know what? I'm going to ask one question because I'm conscious of time, and there are still people in the audience that I want to give a chance to chat to. So I'm just going to give one last question, which I'm going to go to everybody on, which is, give me one top tip for study recruitment, the kind of one thing that you think is the best way to attract people to your study. And I'm going to go to Sarah first. Sarah's been a while. and putting you on the spot as well.
It's probably going to be really boring now because I think we've all said it, but it's just investing time in building the relationship and just being real and, showing that you're a human being, connecting on that human level and not being afraid to do that, really. So it's really helpful to disclose something about yourself without disclosing everything so that you can make that connection. And I think it's already been said, just showing that empathy and willingness to chat.
Thank you, Sarah. Charlotte. I mean, I know what you're going to say.
Am I allowed to say Join Dementia Research?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Just keep saying it.
Join Dementia Research. I mean, we're always more than happy to help. And I'm aware that some studies, if you're looking for a more specific demographic that our matching criteria might kind of struggle to initially match to, we're always up for kind of experimenting around with things and seeing how many people we can match your study to. But yeah, it's been really interesting hearing Sarah and Sophia talk, though. I think it's just great from my perspective as well. I'm just kind of behind the service, but it's always interesting to know more. So yeah, I'm going to say Join Dementia Research, but
absolutely.
I'm biased.
I mean, even if that, and let's face it, I mean, any good recruitment strategy will have multiple mechanisms for recruiting people. Join Dementia Research can sit alongside everything else you do. And you can be very specific in saying, I want people from this city that are this age group.
Absolutely, yep.
Sophia.
Personalize the invitation. So you want to say to people, I want you in particular in my research, not Susan or another person, but you. So make people feel welcome and personalize the invitation to them.
Thank you, Sophia. I'm kind of, I tend to think a bit big, and I quite like the idea of coming together a little bit more as researchers when we're thinking about our study recruitment. I think all too often people work in silos and recruit, become very single-minded to recruit to my study at the time when I want people. And I think actually there's some great opportunities for researchers to come together a little bit more as a community to think about, a whole suite of studies that are coming along. So I like the idea that you could potentially go to colleagues in your institution, become aware of the other studies going on around you, so that when you are talking to people about your study and you find that person isn't suitable perhaps, or they're not interested, you could potentially say, well, my colleague's got a great study you'd be interested in. I quite like the idea of a bit of teamwork when it comes to study recruitment. I doubt this is magically going to happen, but hey, let's talk about that some more. Come into the community. Let's talk about how we might support each other a little bit more in this, and actually put the person at the heart of this rather than thinking about our study. So we can, when we're having a conversation with somebody living with dementia or a carer or whoever that is, we can look at what they want and then find the study that suits them rather than just trying to find the people we want for our study. So a bit of teamwork. Inspiration. Thank you so much, Charlotte Jones, Sarah Griffiths, Sophia Amenya. We're all going to stick around now. I'm going to play some background music. We're going to jump into the chat, and we're going to hear from those of you who stuck around long enough to get your ideas. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.